I'd like to begin with the gospel reading appointed for today. Jesus said, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father." Well, today is Good Shepherd Sunday. It is a day to remember that Jesus is our Good Shepherd, the shepherd who does lay down his life out of love for his flock. But beyond this fairly obvious metaphor for who Jesus is to us, this is really a difficult passage to make sense of. Who are the hired hands who leave the sheep to fend for themselves when the wolf comes? What does Jesus mean when he says that his sheep know him in the same way that he knows the Father? And who are the other sheep who do not belong to this fold and yet know and recognize the voice of Jesus as their shepherd? Well, of course, the first question that we have to answer is, who is Jesus? In John's Gospel, as in the letters of Paul, Jesus is identified as the Word of God. Not the word that God spoke, but the word that God is always speaking, that which is constantly speaking creation into existence and guiding the course of its evolution and development. Indeed, the New Testament declares in many different ways that the Logos, the Word of God, became incarnate in Jesus precisely to guide our spiritual evolution and development out of one age and into a new one, and into a deeper and more comprehensive connection between God and our own souls. It is in that sense that Jesus is our shepherd, leading us in the direction that God intends for us, leading us to a closer, more direct, and more intimate relationship with God the Father. I would think it's safe to say that the hired hands represent the leaders of organized religion, who allow their love of and devotion to the religion to supersede their love of God. The temple sacrifices, for instance, made some sense when you brought a lamb or calf which you had raised with your own hands to offer to God. But in Jesus' day, Israel was no longer an agrarian nation, so you just bought a lamb on your way into the temple. Now, technically, Temple Judaism was following the black letter of the law laid down in the Torah. But in so doing, it was ignoring the spirit of the law, which was meant to draw us into this kind of awareness of our existential intimacy and dependency upon God in daily life. Now, I think there's probably a lesson in there for us Episcopalians and probably Presbyterians who tend to think that the 11th commandment is because we were commanded to do it this way and we have always done it this way. At what point, though, does our outward or earthly method for connecting our spirits to God cease to be spiritually effective? At what point, we must always ask, are we ceasing to engage ourselves in sacrament and merely engaging in ritual? That certainly described the state of Temple Judaism in Jesus' day. Now, I don't think that the Eucharist is in any immediate danger of becoming a mere ritual anytime soon. By training ourselves to see God in the very commonplace, everyday elements of bread and wine, we train our eyes and our hearts to see God everywhere, above and through and in all things, as Paul says. But it's always worth asking ourselves whether we're devoted to the practice of communion or devoted to communing with God through the practice of communion. Which dovetails actually into the next question. What does Jesus mean when he says that his sheep know him in the same way which he knows the Father? Well, today's reading from the first letter of John gives us a clue, and I quote, This is his commandment, that we should believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another just as he has commanded us. All who obey his commandments abide in him, and he abides in them. And by this we know that he abides in us, by the Spirit that he has given us. When we put our trust in Jesus and follow his command to love one another, then we know Jesus in the same way that Jesus knows God, abiding in each other. Jesus puts his trust in God, that the outcome of his crucifixion would bless his flock. So when things don't seem to be going our way, we just have to surrender it to Jesus. We can always intend to do what we do, but we can never intend the outcome of what we do. That we have to trust to Christ, believing that the Maker of the world is still ultimately in charge of its evolution and development. But John tells us that we have to do more than just trust that God will make things come out right. We must also intend to manifest love in everything we do. Little children, says John, let us love not in word or speech, but in truth and action. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother and sister in need, yet refuses to help? To put it simply, to know Jesus as Jesus knows the Father means doing what Jesus would do in any given situation or moment. Be loving. If you love, Jesus abides in you, and you abide in him. And finally, who are those other sheep that do not belong to this fold and yet belong to Christ? Well, Matthew puts it this way: whoever does the will of my Father is my brother, my sister, and my mother. And what is the will of the Father? That we should love God and love our neighbors as ourselves. There are Hindus that do that. There are Muslims that do that. There are Jews that do that. There are even a few Christians who actually live their lives out of love for God and love for their neighbors. Surprise, surprise. But Jesus is quick to caution us, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only those who do the will of my Father in heaven, only those who manifest love for God and love for their neighbor. I would even go so far as to suggest that probably even atheists who do not believe that there is a God often manifest the love of God and neighbor in their manner of living. Jesus even gives us a list of those a list of what those who do the will of God look like. They feed the hungry. They clothe the naked. They give drink to the thirsty and food to the hungry. They reach out to those who are isolated by sickness, infirmity, incarceration, or by other circumstances. These are the ones who do the will of my Father. These are the other sheep who don't belong to that same Christian fold that we do. Jesus is our good shepherd. When we do the will of his Father, when we love God and love our neighbors as much as we love our own self, then we are truly his sheep. There are others who don't belong to the Christian fold that are also his, and they show it by the same way. And one day Jesus promises we will all know ourselves to be part of one flock, following one voice. Now the shepherd, the owner of the flock, willingly lays down his life for the good of his sheep because his sheep are his life. The hired hand is willing to protect the sheep only as long as it doesn't involve putting himself at risk. This is the one who says to Jesus, Lord, Lord, but does not then do the will of God to give himself in love for the sake of others, as Jesus gave himself for us. So we remember today that Jesus is our good shepherd, the one who laid down his life for us. He is the source of our every blessing. He works constantly for our good, even at the cost of his own life. And that is what we are called to do as well, to work unceasingly and unsparingly for the good of the world. God bless you.